Hello and welcome to the Practice Marketing Podcast, highlighting successful strategies from North America's fastest growing clinics and experts so you can learn from their wins and power your practice growth. Hi, I am your host, Neil Trickett, CEO of Practice Promotions, and today we're going to talk about how to focus on patient satisfaction with the one and only Heidi Jannenga here, the co-founder and chief clinical officer at WebPT. Tons and tons of experience that she has in this field. So it's great to have her back on the podcast. I think this is your third time. And as you know, October is PT Awareness Month, and that is a great time to focus on improving patient satisfaction. And Heidi is going to share some actionable strategies on how clinic leaders can use data to create a better experience for patients and improve their finances along the way. So Heidi, welcome to the podcast.
Well, Neil, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be back with you. This is always so much fun. And I always learn something, even though I know we share a lot of information back and forth, but I always learn something from you as well. So I'm looking forward to this next 30, 45 minutes.
All right, let's do it. So let's dive in here and let's give some great value to our listeners. And you have a ton of data because you collect a ton of data there at WebPT on this particular subject. So why should PT owners really be laser focused on patient satisfaction?
Well, patient satisfaction, is an umbrella term that obviously when we think about it, I think people think about the surveys that we give to patients to provide us feedback with regard to, what their experience was during the time that they were with you. But when you think about how you turn that information into actionable insights for your own practice, I think we think about it in terms of sort of three different aspects, if you will. It's that first impression maybe that you get when you first enter the practice or even have contact with the practice, your marketing sort of realm. And then it's obviously the experience that they have when they're inside the practice or, interacting with any of the providers or employees of your practice. And a lot that leads to, that experience piece looks at retention, like how well are they actually enjoying the time that they're there and how much would they actually want to come back. And then all of that sort of lines right up to, revenue or financial clarity. Right? Your billing processes, like how clear are some of those things? And obviously, when we talk about retention, that means more visits, right? So it all kind of comes throughout all of the different cycles that it requires to run a great business. It comes back to patient satisfaction. And we know that if patients are satisfied, better outcomes are acquired. Happy patients have better outcomes, which essentially means better referrals, better references, better testimonials, and just overall improvement in your overall practice. So we can't underscore patient satisfaction enough. It's kind of the foundation to just a great practice.
That totally makes sense. And yeah, I can testify to working with a lot of different clinic owners, and the ones that really have that patient experience dialed in, the marketing is so much easier than the ones that struggle with that patient experience component. It's hard to market that, right? Because there is a component of word of mouth to some degree, and the better you can get into that word of mouth, the easier everything else becomes. But the word of mouth, what does that come from? It comes from that patient experience, the patient satisfaction. And
I think we get caught up a lot in objective measures, you know what I mean? Like the net promoter score and CSATs or customer satisfaction scores. And it's really the comments, in my opinion, right, as to why they gave those scores is actually probably more important sometimes than the number that they actually give you. We know that those scores mean things, especially with NPS and Net Promoter Score, but it's the underlying why behind those things, I think, is what's critically important and create those actionable things that you can do to make your patient satisfaction or the clinic satisfaction, clinic experience even better.
Yeah, love that. And to me, I was just kind of thinking about when you were talking about, and you alluded to this, and I've seen something too with WebPT, how the focus really is on patient experience. And I think just reframing the verbiage, right? So instead of being patient satisfaction, because if someone's just satisfied, that's just like you delivered exactly what was promised, right? But that patient experience, if it's an incredible experience, you've gone beyond just being satisfied, right? So I'm thinking with that terminology, like we should focus on the patient experience, not just necessarily patient satisfaction, because we want that wow experience, right?
100%. Yeah. And when you say experience, it's from start to finish, right? It's the, and it encompasses all aspects of the experience that they've had with you, from front office staff to the clinical staff, even to, back office billing staff, right? So everybody has a part to play when you think about it from a patient experience aspect.
Yeah, totally. And I went through something recently that was akin to this, and my wife and I were a part of a business group, and they set us up with a like a VIP Disney tour, right? So having that kind of level of Disney experience was the whole customer experience journey from what you received prior to even showing up, what was expected, what was the service like when you got there, how did they take care of you, like everything was thought out and planned and prepared. And so are we bringing that level of program and process to our clinics, right, to deliver on, like you said, from start to finish, that whole patient journey with us? And so you've done a ton of data with thousands and thousands of clinics. And so what do you see from the data? What does that reveal about why patients drop off before even starting care?
Well, the numbers are astonishing, and we can talk about a couple of different parts of patient drop off and what that means, because it can be a lot of different reasons. But we know that approximately there's the majority of studies out there show that approximately 70% of patients drop out before completing their recommended course of treatment. So 7 out of 10 patients. Let's say you recommend, twice a week for 4 weeks, so 8 visits. The majority of them are only going to finish 6 or so of those visits. They're not going to get those full 8. So what that means is you're losing out on 2 revenue visits, right? And so the question is, why aren't they completing their full plan of care? If you go to, my daughter just tore her ACL. We know exactly how many visits she needs to see with that physician. You're going to follow up with me in 3 days or a week to get your stitches out. And then I want you to follow up with me in another 3 weeks. And then we'll do a 6 or a 3-month follow up, right? There's these very clear products and nobody questions it. Of course, I'm going to go see you all of these times, right? And so as a PT, that initial evaluation is so critical to establishing that relationship. And let's just back up to the front office experience, right? The first impression officer, as we like to call them,
Mm-hmm.
right? In how well, to your point of process, do you have that dialed in of getting the paperwork completed, right? Getting the insurance information, the pre-authorization, all of those things completely dialed in to a very efficient process to make that experience super easy for the patient to be able to then come in. And then that initial evaluation of that interaction with the therapist, feeling how do they feel when they leave? Do they feel like they're going to be engaged in what they're doing? Do they know exactly what is in store for them for that plan of care? And feel empowered that they know that these are, when they come in to their visits, these are not just things that they could just go through at home, but these are truly, things that a therapist who is most of the time a doctorate level professional, that's going to be able to provide services at a level that could be expected.
Mm-hmm.
So I think some of the things that don't happen, right, are some of these sort of mismatched expectations of, the orthopedist or the physician might have set up a good sort of expectation of what you should have when you go into PT, and that may not always match what the patient experiences when they come into PT.
Mhm.
We are one of the lucky providers that can spend multiple visits with a patient during a short period of time. Um, but then we also have to understand patient financial responsibility, right? And work with them in ways that, if they have a high copay or high deductible, in ways that they actually truly feel value with each visit that they come in to see us. Because if they don't, that's when that dropout starts to happen.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So it's really that whole patient experience, the scheduling, making that as smooth as possible, setting, the expectations of what I think that's even key, right? Like setting those expectations of how your visit's going to go, and then even pre-framing how therapy will look. And if you have you can make it easy and have like a 1, 2, 3 phase, right? So that they understand like, hey, phase one is getting you out of pain and getting things starting to move. Phase two is all about recovering range of motion, and phase three is about strength and coordination. So you just keep it super simple for them, but making it like they, even before they come in for that first eval, they know they're going to go through a process. It's going to take some time, and there's a process to things. And I think we don't often talk about that enough. And then at a clinician level, yeah, we have our plan of care that we're talking about what it's gonna look like, but framing that in a way that is going to be a phased recovery for them, and that we're going to move through these different phases, and this is what to expect in the first couple of weeks, this is what to expect in the next week, and the third, fourth week. The greater that we can paint that picture, the more agreement that we can get from our patients. And I learned one thing in business a long time ago. It's called UAC, understanding, agreement, and commitment. And so we're asking people, do we have an understanding here of what you have, and then can we agree on that solution, that plan of care, and then can you commit to that, right? So we're asking, can they commit to it? So like you said before, it's that mismatch when we think that the patient's going to agree to whatever, but they have a totally different idea. That's when we have problems, and that's when people drop off. So that UAC can come really handy
Yeah,
all across the board.
I love that UAC. And if you don't have like a clear roadmap that you are helping them to understand, here is what we're trying to get to, and here are the steps along the way, what your expectations are for home exercise program and other things, as well as, what we're going to be doing and how that's going to get you to those goals. Like, we obviously have requirements of setting patient goals. If you're setting those arbitrarily and not actually getting the commitment of the patient into those goals, right? There's no sort of buy-in of hey, we're working as a team here, we're working together to accomplish those goals. I think there's sometimes a miss on that as well, where you're not engaging specifically with the patient, and you're dialing in those 5 goals that you give every patient of this diagnosis. That every patient has to be, somewhat uniquely treated in what their expectation is and what they want to get out of PT. Why are you here?
Hmm.
Is sometimes a good question to even start out with. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Um, and then the one other thing, Neil, that I would say is, I know that the financial barriers are real, especially in where we are today with insurance, and those financial constraints are really important. And so having those uncomfortable conversations, I think sometimes not leaving that to the front office, but truly also embracing that as clinicians and understanding like, hey, I know the doc wants you to come in 3 times a week for 4 weeks, or we think that that's, what would be most beneficial, but we understand there's financial constraints. So how do we work together and get you in at least 1 or 2 times, or maybe, we'll start out with 3 this week, and then we'll back it down to 2 and then 1 as you get more comfortable with your home exercise program. But why that's so critical at first to really get your range of motion back, or, this hands-on, work that we're going to do with you is so critical in these first couple of weeks that you can't do on your own at home. All of those like transparency and explanations of just taking that extra minute or two to make those explainers can go such a long way with developing that rapport with a patient.
Hmm.
And as our time constraints, get tighter and tighter, as, our financial constraints as therapists and clinic owners, right? Of how much we're getting paid per session, it takes skill to be concise and to not only develop rapport, but also be able to get what you're trying to accomplish across to that patient. And so, I don't know. I think there's a lot of education, and I know it comes sometimes easier to more seasoned clinicians, but it's something we really need to be reinforcing with our newer grads, and how to get that across,
Hmm.
and that development of that rapport early in the sessions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And have you seen, as you've worked with lots of different clinical directors, for example, uh, is there like a framework for PTs, like the in the clinic, that might have a process saying, hey, look, this is a framework that we have for working with financial accommodations, and you can work within this framework depending on the needs of that patient? Or is it something we just kind of let the therapists out to the wolves? Like, you figure it out in terms of what we can work with the patient on?
Yeah, no, I'm seeing many more clinics now have specific frameworks as to knowing ahead of time, hey, or having that conversation early, um, as they're scheduling. Again, it goes to knowing early, like your insurance verification, and walking that through with the patient early. So, hey, you're going to have a $60 copay, or you have a $5,000 deductible. And right now you've only met 2,500 of it. Um, this is what, where it's going to cost for this many visits up front. And so when they balk at that initially, or say, wow, I don't know that I can afford that, that's an immediate flag for the therapist to have that conversation and be thinking about it, even going into the initial eval, so that you're planning your plan of care appropriately, again, with that patient, being transparent with them. Hey, and this is the thing, it's all about communication. If the
Mhm.
patient feels like you're a well-run clinic, I spoke to my front office about this. They already know. Now my front office has related that to me. I, as your therapist, am having that conversation with you.
Mhm.
Those things create this, to your point earlier, of this well-oiled machine. And at the heart of it is you putting their needs along with their goals at the forefront of your plan of care. And so being able to relate to that, and again, explaining very clearly why it's so important for them to come to PT, and then demonstrating that value each time that they come in. Um, it's really, really important to truly meet not have that dropout problem, and be able to fully complete their plans of care.
Oh, I love that. What I've seen too is that from a sales perspective, right? Is people like choice. So if you get you if you just tell the patient what they have to do, people put up a wall, right? And they may not go into agreement with what your recommendation is for them, versus if you come together with a choice. And it could be something like you alluded to earlier, like, hey, you have this problem, and this is what it's really going to take to get through that. We could have a couple different options, right? One is we could do heavy at the beginning and then kind of feather it out at the end as you get better. Or we can commit to doing it this way, and we'll see faster results doing that. So if you give the person some different options, some choice, in their mind, they're making like, can I afford this? Instead of it being like, can I afford to do this? It's more like, okay, how can I make that happen? Right? And so I always, from a sale, like, if you got to approach your therapist from that sales perspective, okay, how they position it to patients, working with them is giving them maybe two, sometimes three choices of options, but usually like two is pretty good. And then at least you get the commitment out of it, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's important to work with the patient, but I also think it's important that you are the, provider, the healthcare provider, and the authority in the room, right? So it's also important to make sure they understand, to get the best outcomes, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is what we've seen, and we know that, seeing us twice a week is going to get you, to your point, of getting you better faster. Um, we know it can be a financial burden. The other thing I'll say, Neil, is having some different kind of payment plans that are available for clinics and patients to be able to utilize. That you do collect something every visit, but at the same time, you can also put them on a payment plan so that even if they don't have it, you're collecting, on that total bill throughout the time that you've allotted to have that pay off. And so that's another option. So the sticker shock of that $60 every visit may not be something that they can afford, but if you are able to get them on a payment plan, maybe it's you're space that out for 3 months versus
Right.
the 1 month that they're there. That also sometimes can be something that patients can feel better about. I mean, everything is buy now, pay later, I feel like. So it makes sense that you could do that with your healthcare bills too.
Absolutely, yeah, and I've seen that too, going through different, medical procedures and things like that. Is that especially like surgeries and stuff, they'll have payment options or payment plans that you can work with, and there's tons of different solutions, right, that are available out there for clinics to do that. But I think the general concept is for people, again, to lessen that sticker shock, saying, hey, this is something we can help you out over a couple months. So you're not lessening the amount of revenue that you bring in for taking care of that person. It's just that you might have to spread it out over a little bit.
Yeah.
The top 10% of PT owners aren't just surviving, they're thriving. But what's their secret? Well, Neil Trickett's new Market to Grow book reveals how the top 10% of PT practices leverage marketing systems to simultaneously grow their new patients, attract top talent, and boost profit in their practice. You can learn from their secrets. Visit practicepromotions.net/book to claim your free copy of Market to Grow. Yes, you heard that right. We are shipping a free copy of Market to Grow to all podcast listeners who want it. Just visit practicepromotions.net/book to claim your free book. And now back to the show.
The one thing we haven't talked about is just the convenience of coming in. Sometimes can be transportation issues. We know that right now with the PT shortage, sometimes there's waiting lists. And so, sharing that up front, again, that transparency with the patient, hey, let's get you scheduled out for the next 3 or 4, at least 4 appointments so that you have the times that you want, because we know our schedules get very busy. We want to make sure that you're getting in when you need to and can get in. Having a wide range of scheduling appointments that are not just only what's convenient for you from the 9 to 5, right? I mean, people like to come in early before work or after school. It depends on your patient population. And so, I don't know, just having those different options, to your point, of scheduling options, scheduling ahead, and then also partnering potentially with some transportation organizations. I know there's quite a few folks that partner with Uber now. There's, I think it's called Uber Health or something like that, where they specifically transport patients to and from their provider appointments, things like that. So there's different options out there. I think that we can lower those barriers. But again, it's just, you got to know they exist. And so asking those right questions at the forefront when you're developing that rapport with the patient is really important, so that you are holistically, getting to know them and reducing as many of those barriers as possible to make sure that they're compliant with their full plan of care.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And so you've done a lot of research on this, but does that also tie into the data that shows like why patients stop after just a few visits? Like, why does that really happen?
Yeah, it's all of these things, right? I mean, it's they don't feel value of their visits. They feel like they're already better and they can just do their stuff at home because they're not feeling like you're advancing them, or they just don't feel the value of the PT visits any longer. Transportation's usually a big one, how to get there, and then the financial barriers, right? the high co-pays, the lack of financial transparency. Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I had a deductible. I thought it was already going to be met by my surgery. And we know how insurance works. It's like whoever gets those bills in first, right? And so just the education that sometimes we have to do on financial responsibility and how insurances work, like, gosh, those front office folks in our billers in our practices are so important to the patient experience, because man, you could provide the best clinical care and the patient gets a surprise bill, or somehow has more financial responsibility than they thought they would, and you are dead to them. Like, your clinic is just dead to them. It's happened all the time when I was a clinic director. The patient would just rave about their therapist, and then they would get pissed off at the front office for whatever reason, and there goes your testimonial, right? So can't emphasize enough the whole staff being on board with regard to patient experience.
Yeah. And so there's probably this solution within WebPT, but I'm curious, do you see the clinics track plan of care completion and really use that data to boost retention, or is that something that's still quite missing in the industry?
Well, I think that it's more well known now. I hope that people are tracking that, because it is really important. I think it can tell you a lot with regard to the therapist that do have full completion of their plans of care versus those that don't. And I think a lot of times it can just, again, go to the more novice therapists, that you'll see a lower number of times that patients are actually completing their full plans of care, for all of the reasons that we just said, right? Most of it is during that first visit of fully establishing that rapport and holistically understanding what are the expectations that I have for you as your therapist. What are you actually trying to get out of PT, right? And then all the barriers that that in order for that to happen, for both to be yes, right? What are all the barriers that exist for us to both be successful in what we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I love that. I always remember when I was in practice that you would have a great evaluation with the patient. They were totally bought in. They really understood that. And then they would go back and they would have the financial discussion with their spouse or partner. And that they'd be like, oh, well, I can only afford to come in 2 times more. So you'd have to have that conversation again. So what I found was being able to really give the patient talking points so they could bring that home, right? Because you had this huge conversation with them for an hour, basically, right? And then they got to go back and explain everything to have this financial discussion often with their spouse or partner. And then what I found too to be very helpful was what kind of materials, like marketing materials, are you giving your patients to then bring home with them so they can see, hey, maybe this is your phased approach that you do in your clinic that is going to get them better. And so there's some like visual, there's some buy-in from that spouse or partner, and there can be an agreement to invest basically in your services to help the patient get better.
Just like it's a holistic approach for you and your practice, it can also be a holistic approach at home, right? Especially if it's your kid, right? Or a parent and child coming in. Like, obviously, parent has financial responsibility, but and transportation responsibility sometimes, and all of those things. Same thing with spouses or even friends. So yeah, all of it is just as important for the clinic to have that holistic approach. It's obviously, we know with patient outcomes, can be a holistic approach at home as well.
And I'm curious, when I was in practice, it was like the days before really got heavy into texting and things like that, right? So are you seeing a lot of that happening now, where there's more communication, conversation between a therapist and the patient at home? Like if there's RTMs going on, if there's if there's because the worst thing is that you think the patient's good, and then they go home and they have a flare up, and they're like, oh, therapy's not working, but you don't know because they haven't communicated back. But if there's that open door, at least with texting or like invite to call. Is that something you see that clinics are taking advantage of, or if they're kind of keeping up a barrier between the therapist and the patient in the home setting?
You know, RTM is not taken off the way that we thought it would, partly because it's somewhat complicated in terms of like knowing exactly the timing of which you have to document and doing all the things. Obviously, and if you're using an EMR like WebPT, those things become a little bit more automated. Um, but I think post COVID, we've now reflexed back for the most part to having that inpatient visit. But also, there are definitely some practices that are utilizing text or just, having the patient check in with them. Or what's actually most important, I think, is what I love that a lot of clinics are doing now is after that first initial evaluation, the front office will call, or a therapist will call the patient to see how they've done, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's something instituted by many orthopedic surgeons post-surgery now as well, is that day after that you're getting a phone call from either the PA or the orthopod themselves. And I love that we're doing that in PT now a lot more, is because we know you may get a little bit more sore after that first visit, right? You're not sure exactly what the patient will be able to tolerate. And so having that personal touch of that first visit, post first visit follow up is critically important, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I love that more clinics are instituting that. I think there are some that, will do the text thing of check in via text. We just hope that you're using, HIPAA compliant text capabilities. And, you can do some of that through WebPT as well. But I think that it's really important. I think you nailed it to have that sort of connectivity with your patients goes a long way. And then you're just reinforcing that next visit, right? When I can see you, I'll see you again this week, and we'll try to tweak some things, or we'll address that next time I see you. Or hey, can you make sure you're doing this in your home program before I see you next? Something like that. You know what I mean? Where you can really give them some direction and they can feel connected to that next visit. You, of course, know, those text reminders of appointments or phone calls, but text reminders have been also very important to at least give those reminders to patient so they don't forget. Sometimes they just forget about an appointment. Something else important comes up or whatever, they just forget. And that really has helped with the cancel no-show numbers as well.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of like automations and processes can really help the
Totally.
clinic. Yeah, because everybody's super busy, right? They've got very full schedules, and oh gosh, it slipped my mind that I had a therapy appointment today. But if you have those automated, text reminders, that can make a big help there. And I like what you're talking about there with the calling, right? Because that's something super simple that a practice can do if they're having a high cancellation rate. Especially after, let's say, an eval, a re-eval, or something like, they had a heavy day and you're worried about them. Like, if you just encourage your therapist to have a quick phone call, right? Or even the tech can help do that, right? It goes a long way, right? It's customer service.
Yeah, and I know that having again watching these kinds of numbers of your retention numbers, completion of full plans of care, when we think about strategies and KPIs or key performance indicators, I think are really important. Some of these that you always think about, the number of evals that you're doing, which obviously are the most lucrative for therapists. But when you think about completion of a full plan of care, 70% versus 100%, like that is a lot of revenue that is just falling off the table. You know what I mean? That if you just did and you blocked off, 30 minutes for a therapist to not see a patient during that time, but is making these phone calls, to your point, of every new patient you had the day or two before. It's not that many, right? I mean, maybe 4 or 5 that you're seeing if you have a full schedule of returning patients as well. Taking the time to do that, like, and recapturing potentially 20-30% of that 30% that you're actually losing because, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Those kinds of connections of understanding how much that revenue is, and just setting aside 30 minutes for a therapist to be able to do that and not have a patient during that time. It's again another no-brainer. Like, of course you should be doing that, right? But we're so fixated sometimes, I think, on other KPIs that we're not seeing the bigger picture of how these things relate to each other. And rather than trying to go capture a bunch of new patients, why not retain the patients that you already have in your practice?
Absolutely. Yeah. Got to bring them in the top, but don't let them out the bottom, right?
Right. Exactly. It's just like
And so,
marketing.
yeah, absolutely. And so, talking about KPIs,
Yeah.
so the first step for clinics is really get clear, right, in terms of what KPIs they're tracking on, plan of care completions, all this kind of stuff, and make sure they have that information. How well do you see clinics execute upon that and get their team involved to know those numbers, and they can set some goals together? The understanding the why behind those numbers, like, is that something you see that there's still quite a bit of a gap for practice owners?
I think that it's getting better. I do think I do think that sometimes there's still a gap, especially in smaller and mid-sized practices, only because, many clinic directors or owners are are owner operators. And so you're seeing patients as well as running the practice. And so the balance of time in where to have some of that education, and we just frankly still just don't have enough of it in PT school, to really understand the business side of PT. So finding a mentor or finding a practice that will truly be able to do that is so critical, I feel like, for new grads. I do think on the marketing side, from a net promoter score, your patient retention rate, which is kind of the plan of care completion numbers, I think are starting to become more relevant. I think it's more on the sort of the billing sort of side of things, and financials, that KPIs that I don't know that every therapist, your staff therapists, are all fully engaged in understanding of what it means to the practice as a whole, right? Like, I don't know that if you asked an average staff clinician how much is their plan of care worth, how much are you getting per visit for this particular insurance times X number of visits, like, how much actually do you get per patient
Mm-hmm.
for a plan of care? I don't think that many. I hope more of them could. I hope I'm wrong, but I would bet that most of them couldn't tell you those numbers.
Yeah, yeah. I think it is an important part too, and I sat down with my therapist before and had the conversation and showed them, like, hey, this is what it actually costs to run the clinic and your salary and everything for per visit, right? And so, if we're only making this much off of a particular insurance for that visit, this is all we got left to pay everybody else, right? And we want to have new equipment, we want to have new investments, and so just sometimes we want to hide our finances from the employees, but you don't have to share everything with them. But at least if they have I think it's really part of that whole therapist onboarding to have an understanding and awareness of how the clinic operates financially, and then have goals of like where we're trying to get to and why we're trying to do this.
I couldn't agree with you more, Neil. I this whole business side of PT has been something that, WebPT, from the very early on stages of growing our business, was something that we pushed so hard, because what we found was, as people were starting to adopt and use our technology, there was a gap between, especially on the billing side, of knowing all the things that we're talking about today, right? Of how to make sure full plan of care are being completed. What is the overall patient experience? How do you make sure you're collecting every dollar of that copay? And not just be you need to be a benevolent provider, but at the same time, you're running a business, right? And so it can't just give away everything for free. So anyway, it's especially in this day and age of how hard it is to even collect when you're doing everything right. It's even more vital for everyone to be pulling in the same direction to make sure they've dotted their I's, crossed their T's, make sure we're developing trust with that patient with transparency from the beginning to understand hey, here's your responsibility, here's our responsibilities. So anyway, it's tougher and tougher. And so having full transparency and education in the business aspect of it will only help the overall business run better.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, and I learned one thing a while back in business, and that's called meet to learn. And if for our audience out there, if you feel like there's some distance between, say, the front desk and the treating staff, or maybe the treating staff and the billing person, just do what's called a meet to learn. So even at a staff meeting or something like that, you can say, "Hey, tell us about what you do, right, and how your day goes and your job, right, and what you're responsible for." And so they start to hear and listen, like how hard it is for the billing person to collect money from the patient, and what the insurance headaches that they have to go through, or the front desk, all the things that they have to do, a million different juggling actions that they're doing. So it gives some awareness then to the clinician, like, oh wow, and then basically, if you can have a couple of pre-framed questions, right? One of those questions can be, what can I do to help you make your job easier, right? So if the clinician's asking, what can I do to help your job be easier, the billing person is going to say, whatever it is, like, hey, if you have this particular discussion with the patient, let me know about it. Or the front desk could have that too. So something super simple that you could implement in your practice, but basically try that meet to learn if you're feeling some distance between your different departments in your clinic.
I love that, Neil. And we used to do that with every new therapist and front office, every employee in our clinic that I ran during our onboarding. So obviously, you would be shadowing with a therapist in your first couple of days of knowing where things are and how patients, but the flow of the clinic and things like that. But we would also have them sit with our front office, knowing how we scheduled appointments, like who works up there, how everything worked, as well as with our billers to understand which insurances like require different documentation standards or extra forms that have to be done and things like that of all of the insurances that we took within our practice. And so they would understand why are you getting this extra form that you have to fill out? Well, this insurance requires that you have to fill this out, right? And so having sort of a little understand, it was a drinking by a fire hose. Let's just put that out there. But at least they had heard it a couple of times before sitting down and then having to actually do it. So I love that you have those learning sessions as well. And then but I think having it in part as your onboarding, and again, it goes to the culture of your business that, hey, we're all in this together. This isn't, oh, it's a front office problem, or oh, it's a billing problem. No, we're all in this together, right?
Yeah, I love that. Love that. And so for our listeners out there, Heidi, what would you say is the one thing that they could think about to improve their patient experience this PT Awareness Month?
Well, first, I would say if you're doing any kind of NPS scoring or patient satisfaction scoring, is first look at the comments that you're getting back, and where are you plot all the comments. Are there more dots that are negatively being translated back through which sort of section of your business? Is it one specific clinician, or is it that you're having a lot of insurance issues, or is it that you're having a lot of scheduling issues that patients aren't able to get in? That's what they're disgruntled about. And so rather than just trying to look at the whole umbrella, like it's fine tuning the areas that you are hearing the most negative comments on, and not just sticking your head in the sand, right? Of truly attacking that. And then going surgically from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, rather than trying to just blanket hey, we're going to work on patient experience. Well, as we've talked about today, there's a lot of components to it. And so figuring out sort of the low hanging fruit first, and understanding what some of your KPIs are telling you, right? If you have a a low patient collection rate. Well, you got to do some follow-up. You got to figure out why the front office, is not collecting, or what's your process that is happening, and what's the break. If you have a process, what's the breakdown in the process? So anyway, it's really, it's listening first, and understanding what are the patients telling you that is not going well, or is not satisfying them, to give them that fantastic experience, and then going through reviewing processes for that particular thing and fine tuning and improving.
Awesome. Great advice there, Heidi. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us here today on the Practice Marketing Podcast. For our audience out there, what's the best way for them to learn more about you, about WebPT, about Rising Tides?
Yeah, thanks. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Thanks for mentioning Rising Tide. We're in our 5th year now, which I can't believe already. But Rising Tide is a scholarship program that I started for physical therapy students, in trying to improve the diversity of our profession. And so it's moving along great. And then, of course, I'm sure everybody has heard of WebPT, and if you'd like to learn more about WebPT, it's webpt.com, and we have lots of information that you can find there on our website as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Heidi. And thanks to our listeners out there for being with us here. I hope you got a lot out of today's conversation. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more tips and great experts in the field coming to you. So just subscribe to Practice Marketing Podcast. Don't forget, we also have our YouTube channel where a lot of the podcasts are up there too, so you can subscribe to that. And don't forget to check out practicepromotions.net, where we have tons of marketing downloads for you and tips and advice. So this is Neil Trickett from the Practice Marketing Podcast, wishing you much success in your practice.
A free way for you to support our show is by leaving a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It's a chance for you to tell us what you love about the show, and it helps others discover it as well. Just scroll down to ratings and review on your phone and click write a review. Thanks.